So Ryan, let's dive into the defense and we'll spend a little bit of time on this one. The reality is this is an interesting matchup because this side of the ball is a little bit different than the other side of the ball because I think this is a strength for Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame is an elite defense, in my opinion. But what we are going to see this week, like that we're not going to see on the Northern Illinois defenses. There's a couple potential pros, at least one for sure on this defense, and a really dynamic. I said the MAC used to have a lot of these really short, athletic, dynamic players, and they don't have as many anymore. Well, one of them in the MAC is on this roster, and that's Trayvon Rudolph. But Antonio Brown is a very dynamic player. I really like what they did in the opener from just a scheme and play calling standpoint. Now, some of that stuff worked because Western Illinois is not very good. I mean, let's be honest about that. But some of it was like, boy, that's really good scheme. That's really good stuff. He's not just relying on my guys to be better than the dudes across from me. It's let's create some opportunities. So this is going to be a good test for Notre Dame in the areas that I think are important for this defense to continue to mature because the exciting thing for me, Ryan, and I'm throwing this to you because I want to get your opinion on this. I broke down the game and I came out of that defensive performance saying, dude, they did not play anywhere close to their best football against Texas A&M. Now, they were dynamic because they're just really talented and guys stepped up and make big plays, but there's a lot to clean up when you look at just and not even like, well, yeah, A&M did this. It's just mistakes by Notre Dame where they didn't make a mistake or they didn't execute. There's a lot to clean up, and I think this Northern Illinois team, the way that they run their system, is going to force Notre Dame to have to show improvement in those areas if they're going to shut down Northern Illinois the way that they should.
Well, I think they're going to need it because honestly, like I came out of the first game and the caveat again is they're playing Western Illinois, and all due respect to the Leathernecks, like they're not a very good FCS team, right? So like it's not the easiest data point to just look at and know and think that that's what Northern Illinois is compared to them just playing a bad team, a bad opponent. But I will say this about them is that when you isolate them offensively, I think they have a couple NFLers just from the skill position perspective. Like I think Ontario Brown actually had 6th round grades from the NFL, like midday 3 grades type of stuff from the NFL in this preseason. So I think that kid's going to get drafted. The running back, he's a little under 5'10". He's 5'9" and 6'8", so 5'9" and 3/4 and 221 pounds. Physical, pretty explosive short areas. Like he doesn't have a top gear, but like he gets to his top gear very fast though. And he even caught a pass last week where I mean, it was a check down, but like he went for like 40 yards on the play. Right. So like, I think that he has really good feel for space. He worries me a ton if I'm Notre Dame. If you're not gap sound against that kid, or you're just kind of being a little bit passive at the point of attack and you just allow a little bit of a crease, Ontario Brown could hurt you a little bit. And same thing with that, like the Trayvon Rudolph kid had a jet sweep for a touchdown in that game. He had 4 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown in that game. He creates some big plays. And then the guy that's like the biggest mismatch potential for them just in a vacuum, I think is the Grayson Barnes kid, who's like the tight end slot, who is 6'5", 225. I mean, like he's a difficult player to match up to if you're a smaller defensive back because of his length. And he's also difficult because he's pretty good in a straight line. I mean, he had 5 catches for 95 yards. It's 19 yards a clip last week.
He averaged over 20. He averaged about 20 last year, Ryan. I mean, so it wasn't like he had here's the thing, like, and this is the point that Ryan's making. It's like you watch some of these games against FCS teams, you're like, oh, Iowa scored 40 points. I'll have a lot to say about those 40 points when we get to it later in the show. But, I mean, you needed, 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to get to that point in time. You've got to be careful when you play these. And as Ryan said, this is a bad FCS team. Yes. I believe Indiana State's only win last year was over Western Illinois, who went 0-11 last year. I mean, they're not good. So you sometimes have to be very leery of looking at that. But then you look at what Grayson Barnes did last year. He had 23 catches for 422 yards and led their team with 5 touchdowns, 18.4 per catch for a tight end. Yep. That's pretty good. So this is not oh, well, yeah, he did well against a team that's really not good. No, he kind of did this a lot last year. And, in the bowl game, had 5 catches for 105 yards. Went 2 for 66 in a win over Ohio, went 3 for 44 in a win over Eastern Michigan. He only had 1 catch against Toledo, but it went for 28 yards. So this is a kid 2 for 31 against BC in an upset win over BC last year. This kid's a legitimate, good football player. that you have to account for. And so when you can have that many different types of weapons, Ryan, it does make your offense. I mean, and their quarterback is not a super talented kid, but he made great reads and got the ball accurately where it needed to go last week.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
He did everything he was supposed to last week, and I think they moved the pocket a little bit for him. I don't think he's a bad athlete. I just think he's like a functional pocket passer, right? Like, so he can move a little bit, but the ball's accurate and it's on time usually. And ultimately, he knows that he has guys around him. Like, again, like I'm telling you guys, if they run a jet sweep to Trayvon Rudolph and whoever your rover is or your nickel is doesn't have a good run fit, like that kid could break it for 20 plus yards. I mean, like he has that type of juice to him. Grayson Barnes could out leverage a defensive back down the field for a 20-something yard catch. That could happen. Antonio Brown can make a 5-yard run into a 10, 15-yard run if tackling isn't good. In
a -2 into a +5.
Yeah.
Right. Like in keeping drives going. So let's actually get right into the keys to victory, Ryan, right there, because that's a big part of it. Number one is be disciplined. And not only because Northern presents two unique challenges to you. Number one is they have guys that can make you miss or beat you down the field, right? Just by their skill set. Number two, this is a offensive system that does a lot pre-snap. I mean, they were lining up in 14 personnel on 1st and 10 and doing like motions and shifts and stuff out of it last week. And then the next snap, they're in 12 personnel and they're doing, creating like these huge spaces on one side and then running away from it on a jet sweep. I mean, a lot of bootlegs. Like you said, they did a great job of moving the pocket last week. They do a really good job of some of their levels concepts. They do a lot of post-snap switch type stuff, a lot of jet sweeps. They also lined up last week and brought in, is that Jordan Lynch's little brother? Is that who that is? The Justin Lynch kid, number 2?
I'm not sure if they're related or not.
It is. He looks like him, but they brought him in and they did some wildcat running back stuff where they literally took the quarterback off the field. So it wasn't like they just wasted the quarterback over on the sideline. They just said, hey, this is what we're going to do. Now, yeah, it was great that it worked against Western Illinois last week, and I don't expect that particular thing to work against Notre Dame. But the point is, Ryan, you got to prepare for a lot, and it requires you to be very disciplined pre-snap and post-snap. And if you are, you'll shut them down. But if not, they'll get you some gash plays and make this thing more competitive early on than it should be.
Well, they try to, as a defense, they're trying to make you guess wrong ultimately, right? Because you mentioned like the level stuff. I mean, you also mentioned that they did the thing where they have Antonio Brown next to the quarterback, but they have a running back behind the quarterback as well. So they're running some 2 running back stuff. But off of that, they'll run some play action where they send Antonio Brown to like the flat, but then they'll run like a deep over and they'll have the guy on the front side run just like a deep route where you're creating levels. Like you're trying to make a flat defender or a cover 2 defender make a decision on if he's going to jump or if he's going to stay back. And ultimately, I mean, they made a lot of plays off of that. Yeah. So the offensive coordinator is super creative, man. Yeah. I don't know anything about him. I even forget his name because I think it was a little bit hard to pronounce.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. Right.
But I did look him up because I'm like, I honestly did that with what game was I watching? There was a game. I forget what was it? I can't remember. I'll remember it later. But there was a game I was watching where I literally wrote down the offensive coordinator's name because I'm just like, that's super interesting. Like I think that might be somebody to keep a close eye on long term because they do some super intriguing things. Kind of just on the Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator. I can't remember his name, but like that dude, super interesting offensively what they're doing. Northern Illinois has some of that as well. I don't think it's quite to that degree, but like I was watching their offense and I'm like, that's unique. Like Al Golden is going to have his team very studious this week because they're going to see some formations. They're going to see some concepts that they did not see last week. Like this is a very unique, different offense. Like you've seen levels, but have you seen levels out of the formations that they ran last week? Not as much. Like it was very unique in that way. So I think that the preparation is going to be hefty big for this team because they present a lot of challenges because it's just going to take one player doing a little too much or one player in the wrong spot for Trayvon Rudolph or Antonio Brown or somebody else to create a big play. Like they have that type of upside with Hampton at quarterback.
What's interesting is he was actually a head coach in that really good Wisconsin league before he came to there. And the interesting thing is they weren't very good and they didn't score a lot of points. and which I thought was really interesting because I was like, man, I expect them to be a lot better, but he does some really interesting things for them, no question. And he's got some good athletes to work with. I mean, they do have a Justin Lynch type athlete for, again, when we're praising this, it's not so much that it's going to necessarily work Saturday, but that's going to be really hard for MAC defenses to shut down with all that stuff they got going on. And as long as Notre Dame is disciplined, they should be effective. And part of discipline, key number 2, Ryan, is kind of part of discipline. But obviously the penalties got to get cleaned up. That's a given. We'll need to spend time on that. But they got to tackle better.
Yep.
And in today's football, the reality is most teams aren't going to tackle super great in openers just because the way that you just can't tackle like you used to. You got to get better and better progressively as the week goes on. You have to tackle better in this game, A, because you as a team as a whole, you just got to tackle better. Number 2, if you don't tackle some of these athletes and you let them get in space, I'm just going to say it. A&M had much bigger athletes last week. These are a lot quicker athletes that concern me much more with the ball in their hands than the kids at A&M had. I'm not saying that they're better football players. They're just different. And for a team that did struggle to tackle last week, that's the kind of thing that can maybe result in a score or two that you otherwise wouldn't have given up. So being really sound tacklers is going to be very important this week in this matchup. And then, of course, building in the future games.
Yeah, I would say with Texas A&M, just like a quick note is that like until they start getting Cyrus Allen more involved and they start getting Terry Bussey some reps, like they're just not going to be a dynamic offense. They're just not. I mean, they have big body pass catchers. They don't have dynamic ability. And while it might be different, Northern Illinois does have some dynamic athletes. Like they have some guys that if you give them space, they can create a play and they can do those types of things. And in today's game, man, it is just so important to tackle in space because why do we praise these offensive coordinators? Is because they understand how to create space. They understand how to manufacture space. They, at the end of the day, an offensive coordinator's responsibility is to put a player in a best possible scenario to be successful. And in today's game, that's about space, whether that is screen game, whether that is diverse run game, whether that is different concepts that you run in the passing game. You're trying to create space. And if they create space for Trayvon Rudolph and Antonio Brown and a couple of these guys, they have a chance to make some big plays. So Notre Dame needs to be both in the right spot, but also don't let any, like, no missed tackles in space, man. Like, don't tackle Trayvon Rudolph for a 3-yard gain on a jet sweep instead of letting him burst for 15 plus. Like, just don't let that stuff happen. That hidden yardage, that can come back to bite you in a bigger football game. This one, it probably wouldn't be the end of the world, but you still want to see a team improve in that aspect because down the road, when you're talking about them playing against Eric Singleton and the running back from Georgia Tech, Jamal Haynes, number 11, and some of those types of guys in those games, even Virginia, when you have to go against like Chris Tyree and like that type of stuff, you want to make sure that you are not allowing second effort running. You're not allowing second effort yardage. You're not allowing explosive plays. And that's, I think it's a good test in that regard because Trayvon Rudolph, honestly, surprised he's playing for Northern Illinois right now.
I'm surprised him and the running back are still at Northern Illinois, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's shocked that the Antonio Brown is like, why wouldn't I don't even know an example of a team, but like, why wouldn't a low MP5 school be like, hey,
pick a Big Ten team outside the top 5, and why is he not there? You know, you know what I mean?
Like Illinois. Why is he not in the
best running back in the state of Illinois is this kid, in my opinion.
Yeah, it might be right now for sure.
In college, anyway.
Yeah,
Brian, last key. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
No. I just say you need to limit the plays in space and not allow them to create a bunch of explosives.
Last key for me, Ryan, is I want to see more disruption from Notre Dame this week from their front. That includes being more disruptive against the run. That includes, I thought the timing of the pressures last week were a little telegraphed, a little late on some of them. When they were timed well, right through the hole and getting pressure on them. So not a surprise for week 1. We saw that last year too, Ryan, with the defense where the blitz packages kind of got progressively better as the season went on and they had more experience in it. And that was with veteran players. So I would like to see that be a little bit more effective. I think it's especially important in this game on early downs. If you can put this offense in a lot of, just like last week, when you can put this offense in a lot of higher passing scenarios, they're just going to be less effective because some of the trickeration and the different things moving the pocket just won't be as effective if they're in some long down and distance situations. So if you can have some, more negatives this game, more tackles for loss, bring the quarterback down, more hits on the quarterback, you're going to be a lot more. This is a kid that completed 90% of his passes last week. I don't care who you're playing, Ryan. I mean,
Yeah.
Riley Leonard didn't complete 90% of his passes in pregame last week.
I think one of his passes was dropped last week too, so he might have completed 95%. So yeah, it's
There you go.
pretty insane, man. I would say this too is that, and this is more specific to like pass rush, being able to get to Hampton as a quarterback, is that one thing that I did want to see more of last week from Notre Dame that I don't think we did is the pressures that they got was based upon a lot of like movement up front and some blitz package stuff. I would like to see more true wins in the passing game, right? Like I want to see Jordan Mattello just win outside track. I want to see Boubacar Traore slip a block and cross face. Like I would like to see a couple of these guys.
We'll see Riley Mills have more wins in the pass game against guards as well.
Yeah, don't get me started on Riley Mills, but that's another conversation for another day. But yes, I want to see more high quality wins because every year we talk about like these players that like put up these sack numbers, right? But then you go back and you're like, a lot of them were like coverage sacks and like not high quality wins. And like that doesn't translate to the big games. Like in the big games, if Notre Dame plays an Ohio State or an Oregon or whatever, a good team in the playoffs, if they get there, even USC at the end of the year, I guess is a good example. I want to see Notre Dame have guys that can just win. Like I don't have to have a guy, do a twist, a stunt. Like you want to do that on top of the complement of I can just send 4 and they could get home.
Because that stuff is more effective when you can have those wins, Ryan. I mean, when you're worried about that, that's when those things become even more effective. So I want to certainly see that. That's our final key for the defense. So that's going to do it for the defensive breakdown. We're going to get the predictions next, folks. But before we do, don't forget to hit that like, hit that subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And as always, if you haven't done so, make sure you're signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com.